This is episode 394 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, I'm Sir Stanley Wells. I'm Honorary President of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. Another great method to studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In 1612, when William Shakespeare was 48 years old, and the same year he wrote the play The Tempest, a play where Prospero wields observation and instruments to command his environment, a real-life innovator in Venice was doing something remarkably similar, though grounded not in magic, but in medicine. His name was Santorio Santori. Santorio introduced something revolutionary to the measurement of temperature, specifically a scale. By calibrating his instrument and sealing it, Santorio turned the vague concept of hot or cold into something measurable. His goal wasn't about mysticism, it was about medical precision. Santorio believed that understanding and quantifying the environment, air, temperature, and even the quality of food and drink was key to maintaining human health. By reading the body's interaction with its surroundings in numbers, he sought to give physicians a practical way to control imbalance and disease. In today's episode, we're joined by historian of medicine, Dr. Fabrizio Bigotti, to explore how Santorio's work laid the foundations of quantified medicine, why he is the father of the thermometer, and how his approach to bodily control through measurement reflected a new kind of precision science emerging during Shakespeare's lifetime. Dr. Fabrizio Bigotti is a historian of science and medicine and director of the Santorio Santori Research Project at the Center for the Study of Medicine and the Body in the Renaissance. He is a leading expert on early modern scientific instruments, particularly those developed by Santorio Santori. Through extensive archival research and scholarly analysis, Dr. Bigotti helped reestablish Santorio's rightful place in the history of thermometry, medical quantification, and early experimental science. His work bridges the worlds of philosophy, medicine, and precision technology in the 17th century, offering powerful insights into how figures like Santorio helped shape the intellectual landscape of Shakespeare's lifetime. Before we dive into today's conversation, remember that you can follow along with the history we're discussing through our detailed show notes. This is a bonus set of content available for patrons that offers visual content that coordinates with our conversation. This week, the detailed show notes include diagrams of Santorio's instruments, links and images to the manuals describing Santorio's work, and period paintings related to thermometers, along with several extras. Simply navigate to the regular show notes page at CassidyCash.com/episode 394 and click Access the Extras to log in as a patron or join us if you're not already a member of That Shakespeare Life. And all of these extras will open right on the website so you can follow along during today's show. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Fabrizio. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Thank you, Cassidy, and thank you, everyone, for having me here.
I'm really excited to dive into this history today. I had not heard about Santorio Santori until I read your article, which has so much tangible history in it. It was really fascinating. So I'm excited to have you kind of take us through his story and what he created here today. I know that Santorio is credited with attaching a scale to the thermoscope, but what did that scale look like and how did it allow him to actually measure and record temperature changes? I mean, especially given that his inventions were decades before Fahrenheit or Celsius would have introduced what we can think of as standardized units today. So when we say that he was measuring it, what kind of scale was he using?
Well, thank you for this question. This is a fascinating question. Well, Santorio is credited for much more than actually attaching just a graded scale to the thermometer. He's credited for invented the thermometer. It's not Galileo, the author of the thermometer, it's Santorio. That's a fascinating story in itself because Santorio was looking for an instrument that would allow him to measure the galenic temperaments, the galenic functions of the body. And so these instruments that he invented or adapted, and he says, I adapted this instrument to the medical practice when he does so, function in a way that he was actually looking for well before he could actually come up with the invention of the instruments themselves. As to the thermometer, no one knows for sure in terms of how many degrees the scale actually was, but presumably that was 80 degrees, so 8 degrees divided in 10 decimals, because 8 is a number that has a particular importance in the history of medicine and is linked again to the Galenic rationale and to the scholastic philosophy. But we do know how Santorio calibrated these instruments, and it's something that comes very close to what Celsius did later on. It tells that in the 1630 commentary on Galen's Ars Medica, it says that to calibrate the instrument, he uses the fire of a candle and snow so that you can have the maximum and minimum temperature the thermometer was allowed to measure.
It makes so much sense that he would chase after a way to quantify temperature, given what we know about the humoral sciences and how important heat versus cold was in the entire foundation of medicine. And I love that the fire of a candle and snow were the two extremes. That seems very appropriate. When it came to the substances inside Santorio's thermometric devices, what exactly was the liquid that was inside, and how did they function within the scaled system?
Well, we are talking essentially about water. So the liquid inside the glass tube is water. And the effects you witness are the opposite to those of the mercury thermometer we used to be familiar with. So whereas with temperature, the liquid inside the mercury thermometer, the mercury itself expands, the liquid inside the thermometer of Santorio actually goes down because the principle that reacts, the active principle is air. So air expands with heat, pushing the level of water down, and the opposite happens when your temperature decreases or you attach to the glass bulb a cold substance.
So if we're looking at illustrations of some of these scales from the 16th and early 17th century, if the thermometer scale shows it being the liquid being way down at the bottom, that would be an indication of it being hot. Versus if it was way up high, that would be an indication of it being cold, because we can think of, ice expands when it's cold, and that's more how this measurement was functioning, as opposed to today, where when the mercury rises, it's hot. It would be the exact opposite.
Exactly.
Your note in your research that Santorio was describing vacuum-related phenomena in 1612 as caused by atmospheric pressure. That's surprisingly early. Can you walk us through what exactly did Santorio understand about air pressure, and how did it inform his designs?
Well, that is quite a puzzle, because Santorio informs us about his experiments and innovations in ways that are cryptic at times, because he doesn't not want his students to embezzle his results. And that happened, as you know, from reading my contributions. So what we know is what he states about that. He sees vacuum-related phenomena as the result of a difference in the density of fluids. And everything that happens, he says, because of void actually happens because there is the weight of the substance, the circumstantial liquid or fluid next to it pushing for that phenomenon that seems to be related to vacuum. Why this is important? Because at the time, the vacuum was supposed to attract. So something that is provided with no being or a known entity was nevertheless attributed a power to attract. This for Santorio is problematic because we are talking about something that physically has no existence, and you introduce an occult quality to explain it. So what happens that seems to be related to vacuum is actually the push or the thrust of the liquid or the substance that is, or the material medium that is next to the phenomenon. So in the case of things that happen in the air is the pressure of the air that necessitates them. What does it mean? It means that he had a certain idea that the air exerts a constant pressure on things. And we know that impression is reinforced as you read passages from his masterwork, the Medical Statics, in which says that the changing in the air makes the body heavier or lighter. That is quite a profound insight. It is consistent with something that also Aristotle says, but Santorio seems to have taken this way further. If you consider, for instance, that still Galileo believes that the vacuum attracts or has the power to attract things, well, that for 1612 is quite an innovation, I would say.
I know sometimes with this kind of science, there were some scientists who gave spiritual or occult qualities to what was going on in the science.
Yes.
Did Santorio have any theories about what was happening inside the thermometer? And I know he was quantifying it, but what did he understand about what was causing what he was observing?
Well, this is another fascinating question. He definitely has an answer. He says quite clearly that since the air inside the tube expands because of the reaction to heat, then the level of water goes down, thereby giving you the possibility to see the temperature indirectly as the level of water. But you are right that at the time, there could be other interpretations of this phenomenon. And one important one, which I did not explore, but it belongs to the same period, is that of Robert Fludd, who uses the thermometer as a kind of cosmological and magical device, reflecting the mixture and temperaments of the universe. But this is not what Santorio does. Santorio is using these instruments and precisely for medical intervention and for measuring the temperature of the environment. The reason at the beginning was not very clear to me. I've been struggling for a while to understand why was he measuring all these parameters. What's the point of it? You are measuring, fine. This is a very, very good science. Why? And I didn't actually understand what he was doing until I read the plagiarism of his student Bonomo. And from that plagiarism is a little booklet that is basically taken almost completely from Santorio, but gives us also other ideas that Santorio doesn't want to give us. Well, the idea is to control the environment and to control everything that is around the body so that the body has the possibility of maintaining its own balance in an easier way. So when there is a disease or there is an imbalance in the body needs help. And these instruments, by measuring how much and at what time you need this or that, are able to provide that. So the thermometer has a double function. It measures the temperature of the body, not fever, attention, the temperature of the body, because fever was quite easily measurable or detectable by the physician, because if 39 degrees, any physician, even without thermometer, will be able to recognize that. Santorio wants to measure the little changes. And those that you can, by adjusting the regimen, the diet, or the quantity of beverage or exercise or other parameters, you can recover. So it wants to go before the time when the disease emerges. These instruments are precise because it wants to go before that. And once you know the exact quantity, you can correct, say, the heat of the room or the humidity of the room or the coldness of the room in a way that will help the balance of the body to be restored, to the body to function normally.
Are there surviving documents where we can see Santorio's temperature readings recorded? Where do we find examples of his instruments being in use?
No, there are no contemporary documents or in terms of tabulated data, no. Or instruments that survived made by Santorio. We know that in 1630, his students, especially his German students at Padua, were gifting these instruments that they had reconstructed to the university or to other students because they had become quite popular back then. Santorio himself never provides the tabulated data he used or how he registered this measurement he made. But we are lucky enough to have a long series of followers of Santorio who in fact followed his method, and we have the tabulated data that they used and how they arranged this data. And they start at approximately 1710 and then go on up to 1760, basically. The earliest follower of Santorio is a French physician called Denis Dodart, and he started his experiments in 1660. But for Santorio himself, it would require reenacting his experiments and recreating his instruments to understand what he was doing. And it's something that would be very worthwhile.
Your article draws on written and even unpublished visual sources. What kinds of sources did you uncover, and how do they help us do exactly what you're saying? How do they help us reconstruct Santorio's work and the role of his instruments in early modern precision medicine?
I was really lucky back in 2015 when I was a Wellcome Trust Fellow, because I was in Venice and was looking for sources related to Santorio, especially by his acquaintance and let us call them enemies. And one of these enemies is his main enemy, a certain guy called Obizzi, an entire manuscript that is kept at Venice, at the Marciana Library. And that manuscript is not particularly interesting, except for one single picture, a drawing that is in it, and is about a thermometer. He's writing to his son, and his son saw this instrument at Padua and wondered about the functioning of it because he did not have a clue. And Obizzi replies to his son by explaining the functioning, but surprisingly, it still invokes the idea that the vacuum inside the glass bulb attracts water, so exerts a kind of pulling function. That is something Santorio never allowed. But this manuscript and the notes that I discovered at the British Library, that I can definitely confirm that they belong to Santorio, because in one of those, he writes in the first person, ego, I did that, and is referring to another passage that he wrote before in 1612, so definitely Santorio's. This new evidence allow us to see how he thinks medically about these instruments, and is trying in a way to find a solution to the classical problems of medicine as he understood them, but in a new way. If he thinks that these problems are solvable. The very big difference between Santorio and his contemporaries is that Santorio believes these problems can be solved and attempts at solving them through the invention of instruments.
Given that Santorio's design was practical and measurable, whereas Galileo's was largely theoretical. His thermoscope doesn't allow this quantification that Santorio invented. Why do you think Galileo is often remembered as the father of the thermometer instead of Santorio?
Well, Galileo already during his time at Padua, Venice, and later on was quite famous. And so was Santorio. But Galileo had also a long legacy of pupils that Santorio did not have, unfortunately. This is one of the main reasons why we have, for instance, the original letters and manuscripts by Galileo, and we do not have those of Santorio, at least not yet. Maybe they are buried somewhere. The other one is that Galileo constantly, especially with regards to Kepler, Santorio, and other scientists, claims he has invented instruments before them. But when you look at the evidence, there's none.
So Galileo was a little bit of a bragger about things that he might not have done?
Unfortunately, yes. And for instance, the merchant Fugger says it's like the raven of Aesop. He takes pride of others' inventions. That is partially true. Certainly it's true for what he says about the pulsilogium, the instruments that measure the pulse by using a pendulum and the thermometer, that he did not invent. He actually has no clue as to the thermometer particularly, as to how to use it. The pendulum, he was working on it, but it seems now more than likely, because I also discovered further evidence, that the first use of the pendulum was made by Santorio. And that instrument aroused the interest of Galileo, and Galileo started working on the mathematics of it. So what Galileo is doing in 1602 is to work on the mathematics of the pendulum. But this pendulum was already used as a medical instrument by Santorio. So what Galileo is working on is the mathematical functioning of the instrument. This does not have an explanation for. And finally, you have to look at what happened in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the Galileo Opera Omnia was created, and was created by Antonio Favaro and other scholars, Italian scholars, who took pride from these, making the Galileo's Opera Omnia, all the collected works, and saw Galileo as the fountainhead of all discoveries that happened at the period. And unfortunately, that was a mistaking move to make.
Certainly too broad. Yeah.
Yes, too broad an assumption, because then you find that all around Galileo were inspired by Galileo. Instead, we now see the full picture, and we see how much Galileo took inspiration from Sarpi, from Santorio, from a variety of actors active both at Padua, Florence, and Venice.
Well, if someone wanted to keep exploring this subject on their own, where would you suggest that they start?
Well, there is this publication on Santorio Santori, and the Emergence of Quantified Medicine. It was published in 2022 with Palgrave. The first two chapters that contain the life of Santorio and his theories of qualities and much more are open access. So feel free to check. They are easy to access, and you can read them for free.
We will place links to Fabrizio's work as well as to the recommended resources he provided for us. If you want to check out more about Santorio Santori and his work in inventing the thermometer and this scale, you can read all about that in the show notes for today's episodes. We'll have direct links to all of these so you can find them easily. Now, Fabrizio, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Okay, in addition to those, The Voyages of Marco Polo.
Oh, that's a surprising choice, but I think it would serve you well on a deserted island. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I'm currently working with a PhD candidate who I would like to mention, Anna Gili, or Gili in Italian. She's an Arabist, an Arabic scholar, and we're working on the concept of pre-modern concepts of immunity. So expect something from us in, say, 1 year and a half, because we already contracted a book.
How very exciting. So you're talking about immunity, like from diseases, and an understanding of preventing that in the early modern period.
Before, pre-modern.
Oh, even pre-modern. How exciting.
Aristotle to the Renaissance.
Well, that sounds very fun. We'll look forward to seeing that come to fruition. Thank you so much, Fabrizio Bigotti, for being here and sharing with us the history of Santorio Santori. We have really enjoyed getting to know him and his inventions that much better. Thank you for helping us continue his legacy and know more about this. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cassidy. Thank you, everyone.
As we bring our conversation to a close today, we step away from the glass instruments and water-filled tubes of Santorio's laboratory, not as relics of mysticism, but as the groundbreaking tools of a man who reshaped medicine through precision. Santorio Santori didn't just improve the thermoscope, he invented the thermometer. With a sealed device and a carefully calibrated scale, he made it possible to measure temperature for the first time in history, pioneering a new era of quantified medicine that sought to control the body by understanding its environment. Though he had no interest in the spiritual or the magical, his brilliance in capturing the invisible forces of air, heat, and pressure evokes the same spirit of mastery that Shakespeare gives to Prospero. Santorio may not have conjured storms, but he transformed the world with instruments, an early modern wizard in his own time, whose legacy continues to influence how we care for the human body today. We offer sincere thanks to Dr. Fabrizio Bigotti for joining us today from across the world and in his second language this week, for guiding us through the science, tools, and extraordinary vision of Santorio Santori, an often overlooked inventor whose contributions to thermometry and precision medicine deserve a place alongside the greatest minds of the Renaissance. To learn more about our guest or to explore the recommended readings he suggests for you, along with related episodes, including some on Galileo, you can visit the show notes today at cassidycash.com/episode 394. While you're there, don't forget to access the extras, and you can explore this week's bonus content featuring Santorio's diagrams, historical documents, and museum artifacts related to the invention of the thermometer in 1612. Again, that URL is cassidycash.com/episode 394. That's cassidycash.com/EP394. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. Until next time, may your instruments be calibrated, your body in balance, and your science feel just a little bit like magic. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.